What or who connects all of these? The Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour, Frank Zappa's 200 Motels, W. Hogarth Lear's Hogarth's Hoedown, and Harrison Birtwhistle's opera Gawain. Well, you just heard the trumpet playing, composition and the conducting of Elgar Howarth. Howarth has been one of the most important presences in Britain's musical life over the last half-century, and he's one of the not-sung-enough heroes of new music, of orchestral playing, the brass band movement, and much more besides. As a student in Manchester, he was a crucial catalyst for the group of composers of Alexander Gurr, Peter Maxwell Davis and Harrison Birtwhistle. As a trumpeter, he was in ensembles from the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra to the London Sinfonietta, and as a conductor, he became Birtwhistle's most essential advocate. And he was also chosen by the Hungarian composer George Ligeti to lead the premiere of his only opera, Le Grand Macabre, in Stockholm. But Elgar, Gary, was also appointed the professional conductor and music advisor of the Grimethorpe Colliery Band in 1972, and he transformed the repertoire of brass bands by commissioning pieces from Hans Werner Henze, from Birtwhistle and George Benjamin, among others, as well as writing his own works under the pseudonym W. Hogarth Lear. And it's that legacy that's celebrated by the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester at their brass festival this weekend. So I began by asking Gary Howarth how his attempt to change the ways of brass bands had gone down in the 1970s.
When I began, of course, I was completely isolated because there were people who were interested in new music in inverted commas, but it wasn't my idea of new music. I mean, my idea was Harry Birtwhistle and Henze and various younger composers here that I asked to write for Grimethorpe and very willingly did. What happened was that initially there was a great reaction against, but not necessarily from the players. The players at Grimethorpe were always enormously supportive and cooperative. I had always had a marvellous time with them. But the biggest problem has always been, and has remained, the audience. And I never did try to play, for instance, the Birtwhistle piece, Grimethorpe aria, which he wrote in about 1974 or 5. I never ever tried to play that, if you like, in the north of England, and that was not out of any snobbishness. It was just that I genuinely didn't want them to feel that they had something being tried on them, if you were. So the kind of concerts that we did that included that kind of repertoire, and the Henze and others, they were always played in either university concerts or nearly always in London at the QEH, and that created a big impression and a very good audience, actually. People did turn up because they were interested in music and they wanted to find out what the Grimethorpe Colliery Band was doing playing Birtwhistle, whom the week before they'd heard the London Sinfonietta playing. So I think there was a number of people who were genuinely intrigued by that, and that did have a spin-off because the more enlightened players in the band world saw that it was something new. They saw also that it was something which could open doors for them. For instance, the Promenade concert.
You took the Grimethorpe Band to the proms.
That's right, with Black Dyke, actually. I insisted that we had two. I thought, what do I do if a couple of chaps are suddenly ill on the day? It's not like a professional orchestra where you can simply fill in. You know, you have to have people who've rehearsed.
Thinking about that time in the 1970s, it does look a bit sort of schizophrenic in a way. You're conducting the Grimethorpe Colliery Band, you're working with the London Sinfonietta, and then George Ligeti is going to ask you to conduct the world premiere of Le Grand Macabre at the end of the 1970s. In Sweden, you've got those relationships above all with Harrison Birtwhistle, but with many other composers too. I mean, how do you navigate all of those different musical personalities, if in fact they are?
Well, my main interest was always in what you might call the pointed end of the boat, if you like. I mean, I was always interested in the avant-garde. So I met Max early at university, and then, of course, almost the next week I met Harry. And also Alexander Gurr. Sandy Gurr was a great figure in our lives at that time. Tiny bit older, and, you know, we were very much northerners, and Sandy was, you know, a cosmopolitan. He knew all about London and the music profession through his father, of course. So that was always the most important thing from my point of view. But on the other hand, I came from brass band roots, and I'd always thought that it was possible to do something quite different than anybody had ever thought of before. So that's what these Hogarth Lear pieces were about, like the Hoedown, for instance. Stravinsky talks about inventing music, doesn't he? And I think the two people that I worked with most were Ligeti, and I always thought of him as an inventor as well. And to a large extent also, Harry Birtwistle had found his own different way. He was never a 12-tone man. He always says he didn't like the chords that it made, but he found his own way to make his own music.
Do you think Birtwistle's music might be autobiographical in some way too?
He's a deep one, you know, Harry Birtwistle. And I wouldn't know what his autobiography would be about, to be honest. I have to say, I think he's the most interesting person I've ever met in my life, but it's very difficult to fathom him. He always refers to things being strange, as he calls them, strange. And I think he's fascinated by unusual harmonic relationships, particularly, or building complexes of harmonic flow that are, he might say, strange.
As you're saying that, Gary, I'm thinking of the emotional power that seems so obvious now of a piece like The Triumph of Time or Gawain. I mean, music that probably was reported to have some avant-garde or modernist tag, but now it just seems to speak emotionally so powerfully as well, this music.
Yeah, the piece he wrote for Grimethorpe is an emotional piece. It's very bleak, it's very depressive in a certain sort of way. He belongs in that field along with Elgar. I know that's completely and utterly different, but Elgar's music is melancholy. I was very happy doing what I was doing. And, you know, I was an orchestral player who suddenly, at the age of 40, found himself conducting. And that's like a pipe dream for many orchestral players. I liked what I did, and I would do the same thing over again.
Elgar Howarth, who's one of the key figures of the Royal Northern College of Music's Brass Festival for the rest of today and tomorrow. Get there if you can. Details on our website.